the guilt you feel in her presence isn't even yours. You sense it. The shift in her tone. The look she gives when she's disappointed, but won't say it. The silence that feels heavier than words. And before she even asks, you're already apologizing. Already adjusting. Already trying to fix something that might not even be broken. But what if it isn't about you? What if you're not fixing anything? What if you're just playing out a pattern that started long before you ever met her? This is not about blaming women or attacking them. This is not another red pill rant. This is deeper, subtler, more dangerous. Because this is about something few people talk about. Unconscious feminine guilt, and how it silently distorts male-female relationships. Sigmund Freud once suggested something radical, that much of a woman's emotional experience isn't just shaped by culture or morality, but by a form of pre-verbal guilt buried deep in her psyche. And here's the part that rarely gets said. That guilt doesn't just stay inside her. It also seeps into you. You become the one who manages it, carries it, performs for it, and shrinks because of it. And the more unconscious it is, the more you blame yourself for everything that goes wrong. In this video, we're going to do what Freud started, but never finished. We're going to expose the silent machinery behind guilt, shame, and projection in women, and the invisible toll it takes on men. You'll see why you often feel guilty around women, even when you've done nothing wrong. You'll understand why so many men fall into emotional servitude without realizing it. And most of all, you'll learn how to stop playing the role of redeemer, fixer, or emotional sponge. Because this isn't just about her guilt. It's about what it reveals in you. So don't scroll. Don't click away. Because by the end of this video, you won't just understand women differently. You'll see yourself more clearly than you ever have before. She looks at you like you failed her, but deep down, you know you didn't. Still, you feel guilty. Not for what you did, but for how she feels. And the most frustrating part? She can't even explain it, and neither can you. That is the silent force Freud tried to name, and almost no one wanted to hear it. Freud believed that guilt in women doesn't begin with wrongdoing. It begins with desire. And when that desire clashes with identity, the guilt becomes structural, pre-verbal, unconscious, and permanent unless integrated. He wasn't talking about morality. He was talking about a psychic split. Freud's theory, now known as the Electra complex, proposed that the young girl, initially bonded to the mother, eventually redirects her desire toward the father, not just romantically, but symbolically. In doing so, she detaches from the mother archetype. She seeks differentiation. But here's the core. She punishes herself for that independence. The guilt begins there. Not for what she did, but for who she is becoming. The girl who was supposed to merge now wants to separate. The girl who was supposed to reflect now wants to define. This conflict never fully resolves unless she integrates it through self-awareness, emotional maturity, and true individuation. But most don't. Most carry it, and worse, most men become the place where that guilt plays out. Because when a woman hasn't resolved this internal fracture, she unconsciously projects it onto the men she gets close to. Not out of manipulation, out of inherited psychological pain. She feels undeserving of peace, so she disturbs it. She feels guilty for needing love, so she tests it. She feels shame for separating, so she creates emotional dependence. And you, as the man, step in thinking you're fixing the problem. But what you're really doing is absorbing a guilt that was never yours to carry. Freud called this moral masochism, the compulsion to suffer in order to feel morally redeemed. But what he never said was how often this gets passed to men. When a woman hasn't faced her own shame, you will become the mirror of it. You'll be asked to carry what she cannot name. And if you don't see it for what it is, you will mistake her shame for your failure and start performing for her forgiveness without knowing what crime you even committed. That is the trap. Guilt is power. How shame becomes control. She never raised her voice. She never made demands. She didn't even say what she needed. But you changed. You adjusted. You softened, just in case. And that's the problem. When feminine guilt goes unresolved, it doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It adapts. It evolves. It takes on new forms. However, in men's lives, it manifests as emotional control. Not through shouting, not through dominance, but through invisible pressure. Here's how it works. A woman who feels internally fragmented, who carries unconscious guilt she hasn't metabolized, will often try to rebalance herself emotionally by regulating you. She doesn't do this maliciously. She does it instinctively. She senses peace in you. Direction, conviction. And without realizing it, she begins to shape that energy to meet her own emotional imbalance. She'll ask small things at first. A softened tone, a different wording, a gentler truth. But then the requirements grow. Not outwardly, but emotionally. You feel her withdrawing when you speak with clarity. You notice she's quiet after you make a firm decision. You sense her unease when you don't bend to her discomfort, and your masculine impulse to protect, to accommodate, to make her feel safe. But here's the truth. If her sense of safety depends on your emotional flexibility, you are no longer in a relationship. You are in a performance. And the man who performs loses authority. He becomes apologetic for his own boundaries. He leads with guilt instead of groundedness. That is the hidden transformation of guilt into control. When her shame cannot be faced, it gets outsourced. You become the stabilizer, the filter, the emotional regulator. She becomes more expressive. You become more restrained. She becomes more demanding. You become more pleasing until your core is compromised and you don't even realize you're negotiating with shame. It's not always overt. Sometimes it's in the way she forgets to appreciate, or how she acts hurt when you hold a boundary, or how her mood becomes the thermostat for the whole relationship. But if you're constantly adjusting your tone, your truth, your presence, just to keep her comfortable, you're not in love. You're in containment. And here's the masculine truth. A woman who cannot contain her own guilt will unconsciously try to contain you. Not with chains, but with silence, with tears, and with subtle disappointment. And if you're not sovereign, you will respond by giving away your leadership in exchange for her emotional relief. This is not care. This is codependency. So ask yourself, have you mistaken her guilt for your responsibility? Have you performed peace to avoid her discomfort? Have you softened truth in fear of her withdrawal? Because once guilt becomes control, it doesn't ask. It demands through presence. And unless you stand rooted in discernment, you will obey without even realizing you were commanded. You were calm, clear, anchored, until she walked in with that look in her eyes, the one you've learned to fear. Not anger, not sadness, just something off. Something broken that you feel responsible for fixing. And without even thinking, you step in, you check in, you soften, you take it on. But here's the truth. Most men never realize what you're absorbing may not belong to you. Welcome to the unconscious contract that no one told you about, where you become the container for her unprocessed shame. This is what Carl Jung called projection. It's what Freud hinted at when he said that what's repressed doesn't disappear. It finds a host. And when a woman hasn't integrated her own guilt, that host becomes you. You become the surrogate for her inner division. You become the emotional landfill for everything she hasn't resolved. Here's how it works. Her shame about needing affection becomes your selfishness. Her guilt for saying no becomes your insensitivity. And her repression becomes your failure to connect. You're not just blamed, you're possessed by a story that isn't yours. And if you don't catch it, you start to internalize it. You become apologetic. You explain yourself constantly. You adjust your tone, your rhythm, and your needs. You become the safe man. But safe for whom? Not for you. For her illusion. For her unhealed story. This is why many men feel exhausted in relationships. Not because of what's said, but because of what's silently carried. You take on moods that weren't yours to manage. You walk on eggshells for wounds you didn't inflict. You suppress your truth because her guilt made space unsafe for honesty. And worst of all, you begin to believe this is your role. That your strength exists to stabilize her chaos. That your value comes from absorbing her storms. That your worth is measured by how well you minimize your needs. But this isn't masculinity. This is possession. Because when you carry what isn't yours, you stop becoming who you are. Here's the truth. You are not a guilt sponge. You are not a therapist. You are not her unspoken father figure. You are a man, a center, a mirror, not a mop. And until you start reflecting what's true, instead of absorbing what's broken, you will live her life, not yours. Projection always seeks a surface, and if you don't have your own, you will become hers. At first, it's subtle. You speak less directly, you delay your boundaries, and you apologize more often. You say it's compromise, maturity, sensitivity. But deep down, you know it's something else. You've been absorbing guilt that isn't yours, and it's starting to shape you. This is how the masculine collapse begins, not with an explosion, but with a slow erosion of standards, direction, and self-trust. The man becomes softer, not in the powerful way of tenderness, but in the passive way of emotional submission. And that softness, when driven by guilt, becomes dangerous, because the man who cannot hold his ground will try to earn his place. And that attempt to earn, through emotional labor, apology, and self-erasure, is the first crack in his masculine core. He becomes a guilt-led man, and here's how you recognize him. He's always filtering himself. He second-guesses every decision. He tries to keep the peace instead of living in truth, and he begins to resent her, but can't confront her. He becomes the emotional butler of the relationship, constantly attending, constantly adjusting, constantly exhausted, and eventually, that exhaustion becomes his identity. He starts to believe he is the problem. This is the tragedy Freud hinted at, but never named fully. That when guilt becomes your lens, your truth disappears. You're no longer leading, you're negotiating. You check in with her emotions before you check in with your mission. You look to her reactions before you look at your principles. You ask for her comfort before you ask for your own integrity. This collapse doesn't just affect your relationships. It bleeds into your work, your voice, your confidence. You become a man who survives but no longer builds, who pleases but no longer possesses, who connects but no longer commands. And worst of all is that you confuse guilt with goodness. You think that feeling ashamed makes you more caring, more loving, and more safe. But safety without standards is not love. It's spiritual decay. And the longer you live like this, the more you forget what it means to take up space without apology, to speak without a preface, to lead without flinching. You can't inspire her. You can't protect her. You can't elevate her. Because you're too busy carrying her unspoken guilt like a rosary you didn't earn. This is the masculine collapse, not because she broke you, but because you left yourself undefended. By now, you've felt the effects of her guilt, the way it quietly rewrites your confidence, dilutes your decisions, and bends your boundaries. But what if this isn't just emotional pressure? What if you're dealing with something deeper, such as archetypal roles that many women unconsciously adopt? Not as manipulation, but as an inherited psychic survival strategy. Carl Jung taught that archetypes are inherited patterns of behavior, psychological blueprints that live in all of us. And when a woman hasn't integrated her guilt, she doesn't just project it, she embodies it. Consider the two archetypes that show up most often in a man's life. 1. The silent mother. She never yells, she never threatens. She just lets you know, with her eyes, her withdrawal, her passive disappointment, that you failed her. She doesn't ask, she expects. She doesn't communicate needs, she just quietly resents when they aren't met. In the same way, this woman carries immense guilt for being too much. So instead of expressing herself directly, she expects you to intuit her pain. She guilt trains you into emotional compliance, and if you're not sovereign, you'll respond like a boy, trying to win his mother's approval. You'll tread carefully. You'll overcorrect. You'll perform peace. But no matter how much you do, it's never quite enough, because what she wants isn't resolution. It's unconscious atonement. The second martyr, she gives and gives and gives until she has nothing left, and then she blames you. Not directly, but through silence, through overwhelm, through the subtle shame of, "Look what I sacrificed for you." This woman has been trained to believe her worth is found in self-erasure. She cannot ask clearly because she feels guilty for needing. So she overgives and then resents. You, the man, become her emotional savior. Not because she asked, but because you can't watch her suffer. She won't demand. But her suffering will become your script. And if you're not aware, you'll think her pain is your purpose. Both of these archetypes are rooted in unhealed guilt, and both will turn you into something you were never meant to be. The obedient son, the emotional fixer, and the silent partner. But here's the truth. These aren't evil women. They are unconscious women. Women who've never faced their inherited shame. And if you don't see the archetype, you'll personalize the projection. You'll think you're failing, when in reality, you're just participating in a pattern. The solution isn't to rescue them. It's to recognize your role in the reenactment. Because once you name the archetype, you can reclaim your frame. You've seen the projection. You've felt the emotional manipulation. You've carried the weight of guilt that was never yours. Now what? Because the solution is not to flee from women. It's to stand with clarity. This is the fork in the road. You either continue reacting to guilt, or you begin responding to truth. And that begins with discernment. Discernment is the masculine art of seeing what's there without absorbing it. You see the shame in her eyes, and you stay centered. You hear the edge in her voice, and you don't apologize for your boundary. You notice her withdrawal, and you refuse to collapse. Why? Because you finally understand this is not about you. It's about her inner war, her inherited patterns, her unresolved story. And unless you become sovereign in the presence of her guilt, you will live according to it. So, how do you lead without being captured by guilt? Step 1. Refuse emotional absorption. If she feels off, you can ask, but don't assume responsibility. Say, "You seem tense. Want to talk?" Not, "What did I do wrong?" Her feelings are not your fault. They are her mirror. Step 2. Stay rooted in standard, not emotion. Lead from your principles, not her emotional response. Don't overcorrect every time she seems upset. Let her emotions flow without abandoning your direction. Step 3. Invite truth, not drama. Ask clear questions. Frame communication with clarity. Say, if you're angry, say it. If you're hurt, own it. You are not afraid of conflict. You just won't be manipulated by confusion. Step 4. Stop earning love. If you are constantly earning her approval, you have already surrendered your integrity. You don't earn by shrinking. You lead by embodying. This is not detachment. This is leadership. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not closed. You're sovereign. Because here's the truth. A woman cannot respect the man who fears her emotional state more than he trusts his internal compass. And if you truly love her, you owe her the strongest version of yourself. Not the most agreeable. Not the most apologetic. Not the most emotionally reactive. The strongest. The man who can hold space for her guilt without making it his responsibility to resolve. That's the man she trusts. That's the man she softens for. That's the man she follows. She was never the judge. You were. She was never the one punishing you. You were punishing yourself through her. Because the guilt you absorbed wasn't hers. It was yours. You believed that love required sacrifice. that masculinity meant absorption, that leadership demanded you feel what she cannot name. But here's the reversal. She never had the power to define you. She simply reflected what you had not yet defined in yourself. Freud gave us the first clue. That unconscious guilt reshapes how we relate to desire, to others, to love itself. But it was Carl Jung who gave us the path out. Individuation. The lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, by integrating every part of yourself you once rejected to be loved. You don't overcome guilt by rejecting women. You overcome guilt by becoming a man so anchored in truth that no woman's shame can hijack your soul. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "What part of me believed I needed to be wrong to be loved?" You stop trying to save her from her emotions and start trusting her to face them. You stop shaping your presence to prevent her discomfort and start holding your standards so clearly that she either grows or goes. Because here's the law. Guilt only governs the man who hasn't claimed his authority. And if you want to be free, you don't just set boundaries. You build a life so principled, so grounded, so defined, that guilt has no place to land. The next time she withdraws, blames, or suffers in silence, don't collapse. Don't fix. Don't absorb. Reflect. Lead. Remain. You are not a patch for her shame. You are a mirror of her sovereignty. And the clearer your standard, the clearer your reflection becomes. If she is ready, she will rise to meet it. And if she's not, she'll try to break it. That is her test. But the result is yours. So here's your charge. Stop apologizing for your presence. Start embodying your purpose. And never again let unspoken guilt rewrite the truth of who you are. If this video cuts through the noise, say it. Drop a comment below. No more guilt. Share this with a brother who's been living in emotional submission, thinking it's love, and subscribe because the next video will show you how men get trapped in the feminine shadow and how to walk out without losing your mind or your masculinity. This isn't about her anymore. This is about you. And the man who reclaims his reflection cannot be controlled.